Yes, people, welcome back to West Ham Unofficial. I hope you are all well. You join me for an exclusive interview as I talk to Barry Silkman, the man who got that Lucas Paqueta to West Ham deal over the line. I talked to Barry about that Paqueta deal, all of the other West Ham transfers he's been a part of, as well as his football agent career, being a part of Zinedine Zidane's career, and lots more. This is an incredibly insightful and interesting interview, so I guarantee that you're going to enjoy it. So please do watch the full interview. It's really interesting. We get good insight about what actually goes on in football transfers, what actually went on with that Lucas Paqueta deal. He talks about David Sullivan at points in this as well. It's really interesting. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do, drop a like on the video, subscribe to West Ham Unofficial. If you're new, if you watch me for the first time, subscribe to West Ham Unofficial. And that's it from me. Enjoy the interview. And yeah, I'm Jay Cox from West Ham Unofficial. And come on your irons, enjoy the interview. Okay then, Barry Silkman joins me now. Barry, thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
You're very welcome. I'm good. And how are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. So just before we get into the main subject of this, what sort of role do you play in football transfers, and how does it come about for you from your perspective?
Oh, God, it would take me an hour to fill it all in. To cut it down short, I represent players, and I also represent agents abroad. If they want to do a deal in England and it's somebody that I've been involved with before, they'll bring me into the deal. Or I'll represent a club who asked me to help them with the transfer. So many different ways to do it, you know?
Yeah. What's the best deal that you've been a part of from whatever perspective that you've had it from?
The best deal that I've ever been part of was probably Zinedine Zidane in 1996. I recommended him at the time to Newcastle, and Kevin Keegan went to, he sent a scout. He didn't go, sent the scout. Scout come back and said he's nowhere near good enough. So I recommended him to a friend of mine, Roberto Bettiga, who was the football director at Juve. And he said, we do know about the player. But he said, obviously, I believe you're a brilliant judge of a player. How good do you think he is? I said, I know this might sound mad, but I think he could become one of the top 10 players in the world. Whereas it turned out he became the best. I was probably 9 players out, you know. So I become part of that deal. I didn't actually get money, but what I got was 4 free holidays every year from Juventus for 1 month in Italy. So that financially it wasn't there, but actually being part of something really special was Zinedine Zidane.
Yeah, was that just sort of a pinch me moment in your career? Like, wow, I've just recommended and been a part of Zinedine Zidane's career.
Yeah, by the time he become world class, which was probably about 2 or 3 years, I've then done so many deals in between. And also, you don't like saying to people, oh, I was the one who recommended Zinedine Zidane to Juve. Yeah. So you keep a little bit quiet about it. But that is a moment I look back on and I think, if only he would have come to Newcastle, because then I would have been his agent in England. But sadly, it didn't happen.
Yeah, well, that is pretty crazy. In terms of West Ham, then what's the most influential deal and most interesting deal you think you've been a part of in terms of West Ham?
Oh God, so many. Going back to Eyal Berkovic, bringing him to the club with Pini Zahavi. Oh God. More recent are Ogbonna.
Yeah.
I brought Ogbonna to the club, which turned out to be, I think, a fantastic deal. Definitely, for the money they paid. You know, it was such a cheap deal. I actually got €3.5 million discount. David Sullivan said to me, Silk, listen, you're really good at this. See how cheap you can get him for. And I got €3.5 million knocked off. I worked with an Italian agent called Vincenzo Morabito on that deal. And between us, we crucified Juve. And more recently, Soucek. And I can honestly say, with my hand on my heart, there's 3 people that made this deal happen. There was the agent I worked with of Thomas, Pavel Paska. I represent all these players in England, going all the way back to Patrick Berger, David Sullivan, who hesitated a few times, but I thought of something because the deal was dead. It wasn't going to happen. And something come into my head and I had no idea if everyone was going to agree to it. So I initially thought of it, but then the Czech side had to agree, the player had to agree, and David Sullivan had to agree. And by a miracle, they all did. And that was to bring him on loan because he didn't want to come full time because of where they were in the league. We were one off the bottom, I think it was. Yeah. So he had great hesitancy in coming. And obviously more recently is Paqueta's deal.
Yeah, we're going to come on to Paqueta in just a second. So just with those Ogbonna and Soucek deals, it's really interesting, especially with that Ogbonna one, because I think we bought him in about 2015, and he's been a very, very good player for us, and we got him cheap, and that sort of discount you got from that, and also being able to get Soucek to come on loan, that's really influential. Do you think that possibly those players wouldn't have came if it wasn't for those things, and especially Thomas Soucek, because you said the deal was dead, and then you put that on the table.
Thomas would never have come. We'd have never got that deal over the line. Just a thought come into my head. I don't even know where it come from. We were all sitting in a hotel room. There was Andrew Pincher, who works for West Ham. There was Pavel Paska, who's the agent of Soucek. There's his right-hand man and lawyer and everything else, guy called Andre, and myself. And David Sullivan was on the end of the phone. But we just could not get a deal done. I won't go into the reasons why, but it was dead. And then something came into my head. And I said to the agent who I'm working with, Pavel Paska, I said, Paul, do you think that they would loan him for a big fee, and then if the club stayed up, they had to buy him? And he said, it's not going to be easy, Silky, and they'll want a lot of money. I said, well, at the moment, West Ham haven't got a player. The player hasn't got his move to the Premier League. They haven't got any money for selling him. The player's obviously going to not be on the wages he would be on, and we're not earning any money. I said, so why don't we just have a go for it? He said, well, speak to David Sullivan, see what he thinks. So I phoned Dave. I said to Dave, listen, I've got a great idea. Why don't you loan him for a fee? Then if you stay up, you have to buy him, because right now the player will not come. There's zero chance that he will come. And Dave said, Silky, if you think you can do it, just run with it, see what you can do. And that's what happened. By a miracle, it took hours and hours and hours to convince the chairman out in the Czech Republic, but it got done.
Wow, that's incredible. And obviously he came on loan, and then we stayed up, and he came, and look what sort of the seasons we've had, and he seems, he's brought Soucek with him as well. So it seems to have been successful for him, and that wouldn't have happened without that. So that's a really interesting story.
Well, I'll tell you something else that I believe, and I really believe this. I think without him, Declan Rice would never be the player he is today.
Wow. That season, the dynamic they had was very, very good, and we didn't have a partner to go with him.
That made Declan Rice double the player he was.
Yeah,
it really did.
Yeah, because I think just looking back, without Soucek there, Noble wasn't good enough to be starting in the Premier League week in, week out when Soucek came in. And we didn't have that set of midfielder there. We needed him. We brought him in. He scored goals, and he partnered Declan Rice really well. And they seem to really get on well with each other. That's interesting.
I'm still not convinced that Declan Rice, when he moves, will be the same player. I'm not convinced. Don't get me wrong, he's a terrific player. Don't get me wrong, he's a fabulous player. But for some reason, when Soucek doesn't play, he doesn't look the same player. And it's like, I remember when I signed for Queen's Park Rangers, and I said to Terry Venables, what's the team like? And he said, we've got a left back, Silky, that as a player, he's not fantastic, but everyone thinks he's fantastic because he suits the players that are around him. And he did. His name was Ian Gillard, and he was terrific. But going from Queen's Park Rangers, he ended up in Aldershot. in the bottom league and look very average. Now, I'm not saying that'll happen to Declan, because Declan's an excellent player. Don't get me wrong, he's excellent. But if I was a club and I was going to buy him, I'd buy him and Soucek. I'd buy both of them. But
Yeah.
Declan has come on with Soucek. I think his game has improved 100%.
Oh yeah. He was that season, that dynamic they've had, and they have carried it on as well. They've been very good. They were ranked last season as one of the best centre midfield partnerships in the league, and rightly so. Just moving on from that into the Lucas Paqueta deal then. So just explain to the people watching what happened there and your involvement. What
happened originally is an agent introduced the player to West Ham with the player's agents. It's two Brazilian guys, father and son. And the agent who introduced them is a very, very big agent. But the money that Lyon were asking was way, way, way beyond what West Ham could pay. I mean, way beyond it, like ridiculously beyond it. So a little while later, an agent representing Lyon approached me and he said, look, we've got a player who's not happy, Paqueta. Do you think that you could find a club for him? So I said, well, what are his agents looking for? He said, well, what I can do, I can give you their telephone number. You can call them and speak to them. So I called them and spoke to them. Obviously, I knew about the situation, what had happened with West Ham. And I went back and they were willing to come to West Ham. They were asking for a little bit more money than what they could get, but I wasn't worried about that at that time for the player, you know? I wasn't worried. The main thing was to try and get a deal way, way, way less. And when I say way less, I'm talking way less than what was originally mentioned by Lyon. So I went back to the agent of Lyon and I said, and I worked with him and another guy from England who lives a lot of the time abroad. And I said, listen, can we get a deal at X amount of money? The guy thought I was mad. He said, Silk, I don't know how we're going to do that. I said, we've got to work on it. We have to work on it. So I went to David Sullivan and I said, look, what does Moisey think of Paqueta? So he said, they love him, but the price is way, way out of our range. So I said, I think I can get him cheaper. He said, how much cheaper? So I told him. And he said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going away. He was going away. You do the whole transfer, everything. Deal with the club, deal with the agents, deal with the player, deal with the family. You deal with everything. Anything you get severely stuck, call me. Andrew Pinch is always there. He said, but call me. If you're not sure whether to say yes or no to something, call me. But you know what I'm going to do, Sil? I'm going to trust you. I'm going to put the whole deal in your hands. So the next thing was to phone the agents who came over to London. And I had a meeting with them and got on great with them. A lot of people that they knew abroad, I knew. And they couldn't understand why I hadn't met them before. I then met the player's mum, and I got on amazingly well with his mum. So by the time 3 or 4 days were up, they were ready to come. It was then a question of getting this deal with Lyon over the line.
Yeah.
So I went back to the agent of Lyon. So I told him what we could do and what we couldn't do. And this went on for days. And he come back, he said, Silk, you're killing me. Yeah. So I said, it's the only way to move him. Liverpool, I said, I've spoke to Liverpool. They don't want him at the moment, which, by the way, wasn't really true. Yeah. I hadn't spoke to anyone. I just wanted to get him to West Ham. Yeah. So David Sullivan called me while he was on holiday and he said, Silk, how are we going? He said, because if anyone can do this deal, you can. I don't think anyone in the world will do this deal other than you. I said, Dave, I think we're going to get him. He said, what price? When I told him, he went, you are joking. I went, no, I think we're going to get him at that price. So went back to Lyon, got the player over. I thought, right, if I get the player here and have a medical and agree everything with the player's agents and the mother, yeah, it puts Lyon under incredible pressure not to do the deal that I've told them, yeah, or I've offered them. So I went back to the family, to the agents, sat down with them for hours and hours, and we did a deal. And again, far less than what was originally mentioned. I've then gone back to Leon. I said, look, you've got a problem now. Player won't come back. We've done a deal with him. Yeah. So they weren't over happy, I have to tell you. They were not happy at all. They then spoke to the players' agents who said, look, he's not coming back. He's going to sign for West Ham. And if you don't do the deal and he does come back, you're going to have one very, very unhappy player.
Yeah.
And my next phone call was to David Sullivan. I went, Dave, you've done the deal and this is the deal. And I told him what it was, and he was doing cartwheels. He couldn't believe the deal. Even I couldn't believe the deal. I've read in the newspapers all what they've said it is, but they're all miles out.
So you don't have to answer directly, but the figure that was put out was around £50 million. Do you think that's miles out?
Not if they keep winning the Champions League, it won't be. Because a lot of it was done on bonuses.
Right.
Qualifying for the Champions League, the player playing X amount of games every season, getting to the final of the Champions League, winning the Champions League. So the actual initial fee, without the player playing in all these games and without West Ham doing something that they've never achieved in their life, the initial fee was unbelievable, in my opinion, for the player that he is.
Wow. So you mentioned earlier on that Moyes liked the player. So obviously Moyes went to Sullivan, and Sullivan went, yeah, okay, it's it's good.
Yeah, well,
and then
David went to Moyes and said, Moyes, do you want him? Moyes said, yeah, I'd love him.
So then you went and got it, and really, so you've just told me that you were basically the man that got Paqueta to West Ham.
Yeah.
Brilliant. That is brilliant.
I hope he does well, otherwise I'll get slaughtered.
We're actually filming this before the Crystal Palace game, and he's due to come back from his little injury he had today. So from what we've seen of him, he looks like a very good player. Of course, we played him in the Europa League quarter-final last year, and we all went, yeah, he's a good player. And sort of when the rumours were starting to come out that we were talking to Paqueta, and obviously that was you, we were like, that's not going to happen, really. And then it progressed, and then it progressed, and then it progressed, and we were sat there like, we've signed Lucas Paqueta. How's that happened? And
no, there you go. And I also think, because of the type of player Scamacca is, he needs a Paqueta. Because when Scamacca was in Italy, he played with a player up front with him who played 2, 3, 4 yards behind him. And that player is brilliant. The club turned down 65 million euro for that player. And he made Scamacca. So when I looked at Lucas, I thought, you know what? He is tailor-made for Scamacca. Because Scamacca's, although he's a big guy, he's not an Andy Carroll, thrives on crosses. He thrives on footballers being around and playing him little balls down the side of the centre halves. And as you've seen, when Paqueta played, he's made so many chances for him. It's incredible. I think he's tailor-made for him.
Yeah, because sort of the issue that we've had is that sometimes we've Moyes hasn't started all of these players together, and there has been question marks over whether Moyes actually agreed with the signings of Scamacca and Paqueta, all of these players that some people have branded maybe not Moyes signings, because we know what Moyes is like.
No, definitely his signings, 1,000,000%, 1,000,000%. Yeah.
That's interesting, because hopefully now we're going to get them to gel together and work, because they are very good players. We've paid the money for them, and they are quality, but just to move on to a more sort of more general sided transfers, a lot of people have asked in the last couple of years that clubs seem to announce signings as undisclosed fees nowadays. Why do you think that is, and they're not just putting out straight away how much they paid for the player?
Because sometimes you get the other club as well asked not for it to be disclosed for whatever reason. So you have to live also with what the other club tells you. Yeah. I've been involved in a few deals where the club who was selling him said, look, our supporters think he's worth more than we've sold him for. And if they know what we sold him for, they'd go mental. So you do get that side of it, So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's why a lot of times it's undisclosed. Also, let's say you get a situation of Paqueta. And you go, how are you going to buy him? He's worth 50 million. And you go out and buy him for 1 million. Yeah. If you say we've just bought him for 1 million, everyone go, oh, he's obviously useless. He's got problems. So also from a buying club, sometimes, not always, sometimes it's good not to say. But a lot of clubs who are buying do openly disclose unless told otherwise by the selling club. And you have to abide by that because it becomes part of the contract that they don't want it disclosed how much they've received.
Yeah, because we always get sort of like people that are close say, yeah, we paid roughly around £35 million for Scamacca, just about £50 million for Paqueta. Do you think those sort of things are just wrong because of bonuses and everything else, that it's more complicated than just a
far more complicated? Yeah, it's like with a player. I've seen figures banded about how much certain players earn, and players of mine how much they earn, and they've been out by a country mile. Yes, if they play 32 Premier League games that season, if they qualify for Europe, yeah, and if they then are not leaving at the end of that season, then their bonus may take the money up to what has been said. But all those things have to happen first before it comes into play. So you get a deal, say you get a player bought for £45 million, it might only be 30 million that's gone down. The other 15 million is all bonuses, and 6, 7, 8 of them million may be impossible to achieve. But if you do achieve it, the other club get the money. But if you don't achieve it, then you're not paying it. So a lot of the stuff you read is including bonuses.
Yeah.
But West Ham, by the way, still paid a lot of money for Paqueta. It just wasn't the 50 million outright, but it's a lot of money. I mean, a lot more than I thought West Ham would ever pay for a player, put it that way. And when I actually agreed it, I thought, God, when I go to David Sullivan now and say, Dave, this is what I've agreed, I hope he's not going to say, no, Silk, it's still too much money. But to be fair, he didn't. He said, I think it's a great deal for us. And it is, but it's still a lot of money,
Yeah, because it took a lot of supporters by shock that we'd spent that amount of money, as well as signing the striker that we've been looking for.
Financially, he's the biggest signing that West Ham have made, for sure.
Yeah, club record. Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Does it sort of frustrate you when you see things banded around, for example, that last year that we saw a sort of rumour going around that West Ham had offered Declan Rice an 8-year contract on 200 grand a week? You know, these sort of rumours and things that that go around, which also band into what you said there about the player wages that are incorrect, and when you add bonuses into it, do you get frustrated when it's your players or players that deals you've been a part of, when things are just put out that is just wrong?
It just becomes part of the game. You know, you just accept it, really. The only thing you do see, when you see, like when they said they offered Declan Rice an 8-year contract, under Football League rules, you can only sign for 5 years. So you think, why didn't somebody actually look up the Football League rules to see that you can't actually sign a player for 8 years? So you see things like that. But you know what? When it's one of my players, I think, I wish he would have been offered 200 grand a week. He'd have signed it, you know? I don't know. It doesn't. The only frustrating thing is when you see a player and you read about he wants to leave a club, or a club that you're really involved with is after a certain player, and you know they're not. And you know that the player doesn't want to leave the club. That's the frustrating bit, because writers have to write something. You know, and I remember 3 years ago, I sat down with Dave and we spoke about this. And you know, West Ham were linked that particular summer with 72 players.
Yeah, it's crazy.
By the media, 72. And do you know how many they bought that they were linked with out the 72?
Single digits for sure. 0. There we go. Yeah.
Not one of the 72. The only time the newspapers come up with something that was right, the deal had already been done. So every player, they're linked with this one, linked with that one, linked with that one. You think, well, if they bought them all, where are they going to put them? They'd have to have 5 dressing rooms to put them in. You know? But the medias have stories to write. That's what frustrates you. When you see one of your own players who's happy at the club he's at, and then you read the story that so-and-so wants to buy him, a bigger club, and you know it's not true. And then the player's on the phone to you and says, Silk, do they really want me? And then you've got to explain to them, no, it's just newspaper talk. And then you get this thing where there's no smoke without fire. Yeah. And I've never believed in that saying, because you and me can make up any story we want to make up. Now, we could make anything. I could say to you now that they tried to buy West Ham Kevin De Bruyne. They offered 250 million and wanted to give him £1 million a week. We made it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody will get hold of that and say, well, there can't be no smoke without fire. They must have tried to do something. Sadly, that's what happens in football. Yeah, they keep using this saying, no smoke without fire, but the press have to write something. So 99 times out of 100, they write nonsense.
Do you think, or have you seen it firsthand where you've seen a player that you know is happy at a club and they're being linked and it's heavily linked, and you know people are saying he's pretty much going to move to a club? Do you think that affects players when they see that on social media, or do you think that
I think it
that's
depends
just
on the player? Depends on the player. You know, very much depends on the player. You know, I've had players in the past that as soon as something's come up, they've like got the jitters on is it true? Is it true? I can't concentrate. Then you get another player like, say, Soucek as an example, everything would go over his head. If he read in the papers that Liverpool were coming in to offer £50 million, it would go over his head. Yeah. The only thing he's got in his mind, I get paid by West Ham. This is who I play for. That's it. So I think it very much depends on the character of the player.
Yeah, fair enough. Just to talk a bit about how COVID affected things. How much did you think, and did you see personally, how much did COVID affect the transfer market? And do you think it's better or worse after? Did it change at all?
I think it was a nightmare, same as it was for every business. And I think it has affected every business, not just football. And I think it's made things even more expensive because everyone's getting held to ransom. And, you know,
because you see pretty much average players going for over the top money to these clubs. Do you think the inflation in that is not helping anything?
No, it's not helping at all. I mean, everything at the minute's gone pear-shaped. To me, the whole world's gone bonkers at the minute. And everything comes into that, whether it be football or a normal run-of-the-mill job. I think everything has been affected by it, you know. It's not been affected by the so-called COVID. It's been affected by being locked down, you know, by closing the country up. That's what's affected everything. So, in effect, you stop the business running for 2 years or not running how it would normally run. That has to have an effect, and it has in football. I think it's brought the prices up. I think it's brought the salaries up. And somewhere along the line, it's going to explode.
Yeah, I think it will. So just to kind of finish off the agent sort of thing. So the Paqueta, the Soucek, the Ogbonna deals there. Do you think that solely with that Paqueta deal that was done because you were there? And do you think that the money that they were first proposing was just completely out of the window? And do you think that Sullivan really did want to sign that player, even if it was over the odds, or do you think you sort of got it for the best?
Well, they were asking for €60 million.
Right.
That was their figure, €60 million, which was about, at the time, about 55 million pound.
Yeah, and you managed to get that down to what Sullivan wanted.
Yeah, I got it down, so I'm not sure if it's what he wanted, but he agreed to pay for it. I mean, he gets a lot of stick, Dave, and I have to be a bit careful because he's a personal friend. I've known Dave for 28 years. I met Dave not through football. I met him outside of football. So I've known him a long time, and he takes a lot of stick from people, yeah? And in my opinion, I'm going to say this completely unbiased, it's totally unwarranted. I know for a fact he's put his hand in his pocket so many times at West Ham to buy players, and it's come out of his own money. And yes, at a later stage, he'll get it back, but he's actually paid for it out of his own pocket by loaning the club money. And he's always backed the managers. Well, not all managers, but most managers. And you can only back them up to a certain level. You know, West Ham or West Ham, they're not Liverpool, they're not Arsenal, they're not Chelsea, they're not Spurs, they're not Man City, they're not Man United. They haven't got uh, a fund that is unlimited. Yeah, they're like many other clubs; they're limited. And over the past few years, this year, remains to be seen. But I think over the past few years, the two clubs that have done terrific on the budgets they've had have been West Ham and Brighton.
Brighton, yeah. Yeah, I think because Brighton as well, they've had to go through a managerial change. They've brought in good players for cheap, and then they've gone and sold him. Cucurella as an example. They brought him in, had him for a couple of seasons, brilliant. Sold him on to Chelsea for more. They've brought in some really good players, and they've got a really good and stable system there. Many people have praised David Sullivan, especially from that last transfer window, because of how many players that we did bring in, and he did in the end put his hand in his pocket, and he did spend a lot of money,
Yeah,
which
he went out on a limb. A lot of the players, even Fornals, cost well over 20 million. Who had heard of Fornals? Regardless of whether you think he's a good player, bad player, fantastic player, not a fantastic player, Fornals cost about 23, 24 million pounds. No one heard of him. And to be fair, he's backed Moisey a lot. He has backed him a lot. The biggest thing in football clubs is recruitment. Is how good are the people picking your players? And that's where Brighton have been incredibly successful. They've got a few people there. One of them's a guy called Paul Winstanley, who's now joined Chelsea, funny enough, last week. And if you get someone in who is a fantastic judge of a player, and you've got a manager that tells him the type of players he wants, the manager really shouldn't get involved in buying a player. Yeah, so as an example, at Manchester City, the manager will say to Chicky Bigirstein, we want a right back, and these are the main characteristics. They'll go out and they'll come back with maybe 2, 3 or 4 right backs that all fit the bill. They will then go to the manager and say, okay, here's the choice out of these 2, 3 or 4. If the manager then says, oh, I don't want any of them, I've got my mind on someone else, they go, no. You either have one of those 4 or one of those 3 or one of those 2, or you have no one. And that's how I think it should be done. You should have a really fantastic person in charge of judging of players. And when the manager tells you he wants a striker, what characteristics do you want? He tells you characteristics. You then go to the chairman and say, what's the budget? Chairman gives you the budget. You go out and you come back to the manager and say, right, I found one. You either take him or no one. And I found 5. So pick one of them 5. That's really how it's done at the top. That's how it's done at the Arsenals, the Man Cities, the Chelseas. That's how it's done there. And I think that's the right way to do it. And it saves the manager a lot of aggravation as well,
Yeah.
Saves the manager a hell of a lot of aggravation. It saves Moisey saying, well, I didn't want any of them. I think it's a great way now, modern way, to run a club. And to be fair to Moisey, up till this season, he's done superbly well.
Do you think as well, because we've brought in this head of recruitment recently in Rob Newman? Do you think that he because many people have said that he may have had an impact in perhaps the sort of change in player we've brought in? We've gone in from we've gone from signing normal West Ham players to signing Scamacca, Paqueta, all of these sort of players. Do you think he's a big part of that?
I'd say Moisey is.
Wow, yeah. Just to go on to your playing career, then let's put the agent stuff to the side before we wrap things up. You played for many clubs over your career. Give us some of your highlights from the clubs that you've played at.
Good or bad?
It's up to you.
The one of the funniest stories. Well, there's actually 2 stories. Terry Venables is not very well at the minute. No one has seen him for quite a while. But about 5-6 years ago, there was a big function for Stan Bowles, and I was asked to do all the talking at it. And Terry was there, a lot of ex-players were there, and it was a fantastic day. It was in Shepherd's Market in London. And it was so funny. I got up and I said, I was talking, I said, I'm going to tell you a true story. I said, Terry, you're sitting there, say whether this is true or not. I said, when Terry took over as manager of Crystal Palace, who was the first player he bought? I said, me. I said, is that true, TV, or not? He said, Silk, that's true. I said, Terry's second job was Queen's Park Rangers. Who was the very first player he bought at Queen's Park Rangers? Me. I said, is that true, TV, or not? He went, Silk, that's true. I said, his third club was Barcelona. I'm still waiting for the phone call.
Do you think sort of your playing career impacted and almost shown that you had that perspective being an agent, you know, talking to players, you know, as you were a player, you were in those players' positions. Do you think that impacted the way that you sort of gone about things because you've been in the position?
For sure. I mean, luckily for me, I've always been a very good judge of a player. I mean, even Terry used to ask me about players at Crystal Palace. He used to say, Silk, do you think we should play him in the first team? Do you think I should play him? What do you think his best position is? He was always asking me. I then became an assistant manager at Leyton Orient and at Crewe with Dario Gradi. And I was the first one that spotted David Platt playing in the reserves at Manchester United and said, got to sign him. It was a free transfer. So I've always been a fantastic judge of players for whatever reason. And being a player, you know how to talk to players and how to talk to the family. The thing that I don't get, and I've never, ever, ever understood this, ever. 90% of agents have not kicked a football, yeah? I don't get how a player has an agent who's never kicked a football. I've never understood it in my life, because when you're going through a bad time, you've got to rely on the club. And sometimes you don't want to speak to the club. A player don't want to go to a club and say, look, I'm having a bad time. They can't go to the agent. Agent ain't got a clue about football. He's never been in that position in his life. Won't know where to turn. But once you've played, you go, listen, I know exactly what you're doing. This happened to me when I was playing for Brentford, or this happened to me when I was playing for Manchester City. Yeah. So you can relate and you can say, this is how I got out of it. Or I knew a player at Man City, Asa Hartford, example, went through the same scenario, and this is what Asa did. So you can help a player on that level. Yeah. I don't get how any player has an agent who has never been a professional footballer. Don't get it. Baffles me. Completely baffles me.
Yeah, that's interesting because, you know, being a player and being in the position that, you know, that you sort of get where they're coming from if they say they've got a request or anything, and if you've never played football and been in their position, then I think that automatically becomes a more difficult situation.
No, for sure. I mean, not only I was a player, I was an assistant manager and a coach for 4 years. So I know all sides of it. And at Southend, I actually took over as manager for the last 13 games of the season. I can actually say that we were unbeaten. We won 11 and drew 2. I've got an unbeaten run as a manager. I've never got another job though. So I agree. I just don't get it. If I'm a player, I want someone next to me. It's not, you know, okay, when you become a superstar, it's about finances. You know, Cristiano Ronaldo, it's about, everything's about finances. But when you're starting the game off when you're 18 or 19 or 20 and you're in the team, out the team, in the team, how do you speak to your agent about it if he's never kicked the ball before?
Mm-hmm.
All he does is the agent phones the manager. The manager tells him, and the manager just tells him something he wants to tell him. Then he goes back and tells the player, and he says to the player will say, do you think that's right? Oh, yeah, of course it's right. Because it could be the biggest load of nonsense. Like, no one can talk to me. I've had quite a lot of conversations in the past with Moisey. You know, I've known Moisey a long, long time, very, very long time. He was playing, and he was a manager at Preston, and then went to Everton with a great friend of mine, Bill Kenwright. And whenever I speak to Moisey, it's a normal conversation. It's a proper football conversation. I was with Moisey about 6 months ago, and it was a proper football conversation. And he doesn't talk to me like I'm an agent. He talks to me like I'm a player.
Yeah.
Because in effect, that's what I was my whole career. So if I approach Moisey about one of my players, I can have a completely different conversation to what a normal agent would have with him. Their conversations would probably last between 1 and 1.5 minutes. My conversation would last 15, 20 minutes. And we'll tell a story. Remember, that happened to him. So we can both relate. And I have that with quite a few managers. I mean, Slaven Bilic, I was actually Slaven Bilic's agent as a player. Okay. I brought him to England. He ended up at West Ham because of me. Then went to Everton. I took him to Everton as well. So when Slav got the job at West Ham, we had a load of conversations all about football, everything football. And he said to me, Silk, when I speak to agents, they haven't got a clue. And he's right. If you haven't been a player, how on earth do you know? It's impossible to know. So that's why I'm baffled. When you become a major player, and it's all about finance, it's a different scenario. But when you're not that major player, how on earth do you have an agent that's never, ever kicked the ball before? Once you're established, fine. But before you're established, no.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Barry, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. And let's hope get a good result today. And let's hope we have good results between now and the end of the season. The manager deserves it and the chairman deserves it. Both really great guys.
And for your sake, let's hope Paqueta turns good at West Ham.
Yeah, not wrong.
Thank you very much, Barry.
Thank you. God bless.
So there we have it then. Wow. Thank you very much. I'd like to say to Barry Silkman for joining me on this interview. I thoroughly enjoyed making it, and I really hope you guys at home enjoyed watching it. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe to West Ham Unofficial. Check out our channel sponsors, SRM Carver and Son, by clicking the link in the description down below, as well as supporting the channel. Like, subscribe, do all of that sort of stuff, and hopefully that can bring more exclusive interviews like this to West Ham Unofficial. As I said, thank you very much. From me, that's it. Come on, you irons, and I'll catch you soon right here on West Ham Unofficial. Cheers, guys, and bye-bye.